Thank you. I'm Julie Ashton from the Washington County Museum. And Washington County, for those who are not familiar with the area, is just the county north of here. You can get there in 15 minutes, just straight north. We run the county museum and we're affiliated with Fort Atkinson in some ways. For those of you who have not been used to the area or not explored the area yet, I would highly recommend going out to Fort Atkinson State Historical Park. It's a historical park run by the state of Nebraska, and it's just a treasure. But it factors in, this whole story of Fort Atkinson and Washington County factors into the pioneer migration through this area. And that's what I want to give you a little bit of background on. I just have a short presentation, just 4 slides, but it'll talk to you about something that's little known in history probably outside of the Mormon church and outside of Fort Calhoun, Nebraska. Most people don't know about summer quarters. And the Washington County Museum and Fort Atkinson are in the site of the summer quarters, which was considered an offshoot of winter quarters and was considered Brigham Young's farm. So I want to give you a little bit of information about what led up to that being developed. So it goes back to Lewis and Clark. Obviously there was history even before Lewis and Clark, but we'll start there. In 1803, Lewis and Clark came through this area and met with the Indian tribes for the very first time. They met with the Oto, the Missouri tribe, and they had their first council meeting. And at that meeting, they did not know what was going to happen. They didn't know if they were going to be killed or they were going to be received, but it turned out they were received, and it set the stage for the rest of the Lewis and Clark journey. So if they had been met with hostility, I think our history would have been very, very different. But at that time, Lewis and Clark wrote in their journals back to President Jefferson that this was an ideal place for a military installation. So that then turned the government onto a path of let's explore, let's do scientific surveys, let's send explorers out. So that for the next 20 years, that's what they were doing. Fast forward then to 1819, and there was a reference earlier to Major Stephen Long, who came through this area in the first steamboat. So the first steamboat to ascend the Missouri River was called the Western Engineer, and you see a little drawing of that. The dragon head on the front meant to scare people away, meant to scare the Indian tribes. But he was an engineer and conducted a scientific expedition into this area, of which the site is only a couple of miles from here. And they camped in this area and did scientific studies of the surrounding area. Now, they produced maps of the area, and they labeled this area the Great American Desert. So all the maps of this time period were labeled Great American Desert. So everyone thought that this was just an arid, desolate kind of place that nothing grew and nothing could live here. So it was, and a lot of that was simply PR. This was picked up by the newspapers that this scientific expedition had discovered this big desert out here, and the PR then took off, very similar to what we see today. Whether things are true or not true, they get picked up and repeated and picked up and repeated again and again and again. And so it became known as the Great American Desert. And things changed very quickly after that, but let me see. There we go. Okay, Fort Atkinson. Fort Atkinson was the first military post established west of the Missouri River. It was the largest military post of its day, and it was located on this area, on this site where Lewis and Clark had had their first council, because they had told President Jefferson that this was an ideal place for a military installation. It was on the bluff. The Missouri River at the time ran right up to the bluff. Today it's been rerouted, and it's about 5-6 miles east of where it was at the time. But Fort Atkinson built their fort right on the bluff, on the river, so they could get supplies. Well, it didn't always work. The boats went down, as many other boats over the course of the next 50 years went down in the Missouri River. They lost their supplies. A third of the soldiers died because, as the military does, they like to supply everything to their soldiers and not allow the soldiers to be entrepreneurs or do their own thing. They supply everything. And so the soldiers died of scurvy because they didn't get their supplies. So out of desperation, they decided to start planting their own crops. Well, in their minds, this was the Great American Desert, but they were starving. And so they ended up planting crops and discovered this is no desert. This is a tremendously fruitful place, and we can survive by planting these crops. So over the course of the 8 years that Fort Atkinson was located here, they tilled 517 acres, and they supplied all of the needs of the soldiers and at least as many civilians that were supporting the soldiers. So they planted corn, beets, cabbage, potatoes, wheat, oats. They also had pigs out on Wilson Island, which is just in the river, very close to here. And they kept their pigs contained on the island. They had horses, ox, chickens. They were a very self-sufficient farm. So the fort became known as the place of the soldier farmers. So, and a lot of the military was quite upset with that. They felt that they needed to be doing all their drills every day and being ready for action and war, which they did, but they also spent the majority of their day farming. So they established Nebraska's first grist mill, brickyard, and farming operation. And Fort Atkinson's most lasting contribution was that it demonstrated this was not a desert. It was actually just right to be tilled to become the future breadbasket for the United States. So, summer quarters, how does that all fit in? It fits in because when the winter quarters establishment came here, they needed food. They went through some of the same things that the Fort Atkinson soldiers went through. They died, they were hungry, and they needed to plant. So they started exploring, and Brigham Young and crew began looking for a site to farm. They ended up going a few miles north, and they found the ruins of Fort Atkinson. Fort Atkinson had been abandoned in 1827, so it had been 20 years. But they found that crops were still growing. They found corn, they found horseradish, they found things that they could use to feed their own people. So they ended up establishing what is called summer quarters. It lasted only 1 year, and I'll let Dick Bennett talk to the church history of why it only lasted 1 year, if you wish to do that. But they found all of these things that allowed them to get started very quickly. Because of the brickyard at Fort Atkinson, they found bricks everywhere. So they were able to use those bricks to build buildings, to build homes, and to establish buildings in the area to support the agriculture. Over 40 families were established. They came from winter quarters. They were planted in that area, built their homes, built their families, and they were farming. John D. Lee was the crop manager, the farm manager, the general manager of the area, and he produced 4,000 bushels of grain in that 1 year, which is pretty amazing. Summer quarters lasted 1 year, but there were a number of people who died during that time. I think the records show there were 17 people who died, and they were buried in the area. There is not a formal cemetery that says these are the Mormon families who died, but stories from the old timers in the area say, we have 2 or 3 graves on our yard and on the edge of our farm. And so it's a lot of hearsay of the old timer stories that they have those graves on their property. And many of the homes that are in Fort Atkinson right now were built with bricks that were left over from Fort Atkinson and left over from the homes that the Mormons left and the farms. So there's a connection there. There's no formal marker. There's no formal site that says this was the site of summer quarters, but we try to keep that story alive, and we try to perpetuate that story because it's significant. Even though it lasted only 1 year, it's very significant. And it's a very little known piece of history outside of the area. Okay, the Washington County Museum, where I work, like I say, is about 20 minutes from here. We're right in the downtown of Fort Calhoun, and we invite you to come visit. You'll see the story of the development of the county, the story of Lewis and Clark's first meeting with the Oto tribes, the story of the Mormons coming through. I have some brochures about the museum. Since you're so close, you're more than welcome to come by and pick up one of these brochures, and you can see our hours and things like that. So we invite you to come visit. We also are located 3 blocks from Fort Atkinson State Historical Park. It's been rebuilt. It's not the original structure. The original structure was pretty much in ruins by about 1830. So you don't see real structures, but it was rebuilt in the 1960s. The organization that I worked for raised the money to do the excavation of the site and to rebuild it, and then turned it over to the state for operating. So the Fort Atkinson is open every day of the week too. They have interpretive signs out there during the weekends. The first weekend of every month they have historical reenactments. So you have living history interpreters out there telling the story of Fort Atkinson. So I would invite you to visit there as well. And I do have brochures about Fort Atkinson. So I will leave these out for people, and you can take one of those brochures, and hopefully you'll visit both sites. So, all right. Thank you very much.